Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Niambi Powell with the Department of Housing and Community Development. Welcome to the City of Rockville's 49th annual and first virtual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration, hosted and brought to you by the Rockville Human Rights Commission. Joining us today are Mayor Bridget Donald Newton and Council members Monique Ashton, Beryl Feinberg, and Mark Pichela. Also in attendance are members of the Rockville Human Rights Commission. We are additionally grateful and pleased to have members of the Montgomery County Council with us, the Maryland State Legislature, and even members of the Board of Education here with us today. Thank you for being here. This year's celebration theme is In Courageous Pursuit of Victory. Despite all of the ongoing challenges we face, the social injustice, the blatant attacks against our democracy, the civil unrest, and the unrelenting pandemic, we steadfastly forge ahead, believing that a better tomorrow is within our grasp. We have made unprecedented strides despite seemingly insurmountable odds, and we will continue to do so until victory is won. That is exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have wanted, and we owe him and all of the others who dedicated their lives to the struggle no less. The City of Rockville has been engaged in ongoing dialogue on racial equity and inclusion. The city recently completed an employee survey on racial equity and inclusion, and will continue to have the dialogue, and in the process, identify and implement strategies to continue to make Rockville a racially equitable and inclusive community. Today's program will include remarks from Mayor Newton, a short performance, awards to two outstanding community members for excellence in service, followed by a keynote address and a panel discussion. So before we start, I would like to turn it over to the Human Rights Commission member Kendra Jones for a few words. Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Niambi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendra Jones, a commissioner with the Human Rights Commission, HRC. And on behalf of the commission, I want to thank you for joining us for this virtual event to celebrate life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Rockville Human Rights Commission takes pride in providing an array of initiatives like today's event that are designed to promote and celebrate the diversity that makes Rockville one of the most inclusive cities in Montgomery County and Maryland. Because the children are our future, our Student Ambassador Program allows high school students to also help us with our diversity and inclusion initiatives. Our annual multimedia scholarship competition awards 3 scholarships totaling $2,500 to participating Rockville high school students. The contest starts next Monday, and the entry deadline is March 29th. For application information, head to RockvilleMD.gov/HRC. Again, www.RockvilleMD.gov/HRC for the details. Finally, the HRC and the city's Human Services Advisory Commission will conduct a community-wide survey on racial equity and inclusion in 2021. All of us with the Human Rights Commission are always in courageous pursuit of victory, of racial equality, social justice, and inclusion, not only here in Rockville, but across our nation. And if you want to join us on our journey, you can learn more about the Human Rights Commission and how to be a part of our commission at www.RockvilleMD.gov/HRC. And in Dr. King's famous words, everyone can be great because everyone can serve, or everybody can serve. Those interested in serving others can visit www.RockvilleMD.gov/volunteer for a listing of volunteer opportunities. And with that, let's get into it. Niambi, back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones. We sincerely hope you enjoy the program and feel inspired to keep pressing onward and being courageous in your pursuit of victory. And let us begin with a message from Rockville Mayor Bridget Donald Newton.
My friends, we must rise up with more determination than ever before to solve the problems of racial and economic injustice which confront us at every hand.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Niambi. Thank you all for joining us today for the City of Rockville's 49th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. 2020 was a year of unprecedented events, And I believe that many of the positive changes we are witnessing today are a result of our having to dig deep, to reach into our very core, to find the courage we need to make these changes. Dr. King said that courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. And as I think about today's theme, in courageous pursuit of victory, I would like to take a minute and ask us to imagine what victory might be. And do you, do I, do we together have the courage to get there? The coronavirus exposed the inequities that are rampant in many parts of our country, yet in so many cases were hidden just below the surface. Discrepancies in access to health care, education, treatment by law enforcement, unfair zoning, lack of access to healthy food, wage levels that deepened the chasm in the wealth gap. The coronavirus and the resulting economic crises brought these inequities out into the open. Forced to stay home, many of us had a front row seat to the daily news briefs. We saw the horrors with our own eyes. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. You cannot unsee what you've seen with your own eyes. The shutdowns and job losses cost millions their savings, their housing, and over 400,000 people lost their lives. The word unprecedented is overused, but what has happened in the last 12 months is nothing short of extraordinary. These crises, these obstacles, also give us an opportunity to turn the challenges we have seen and are still facing into an opportunity to move forward with courage. I believe that our country is better than the vitriol that brought us to our knees last year. I will always believe that together we can do great things. We will need to find the inner resolution, the courage that Dr. King Jr. found in himself. And I know that together we will rectify the inequities. We will right the wrongs. We will see the victory that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. imagined for his children, for our world. Thank you, and let's enjoy today as we work for a better tomorrow for all.
Thank you, Mayor Newton, for your message of hope and of inspiration. While we can only be together virtually today to celebrate Dr. King, there is one tradition for Rockville's Martin Luther King Jr. Day that we cannot leave out, and that is a performance from the Soul in Motion. Founded in 1984, Soul in Motion remains committed to sharing the richness of the African-American culture with diverse audiences around the world. Joe's Movement Emporium in Mount Rainier, Maryland has been their second home for over 20 years. Let's take a look. Thank you so much, Soul in Motion. And this event wouldn't be complete without yet another tradition that helps us to honor Dr. King's dream, the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Youth Award and the F. Michael Taft Award. These awards are from the Rockville Mayor and Council and the Rockville Human Rights Commission. And this year, we're letting two of the Human Rights Commission student ambassadors have the honor of presenting the awards. First, we have Yesh Thakur, to be followed by Elena Lee. Yesh?
Hello, my name is Yash Thakur, and I am honored to announce the nominees for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Youth Award. This award is in recognition of a student who has demonstrated efforts to promote the message of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for youth in our community. The winner of this award will receive a plaque with an inscription that reads, "The advancement of the goals and dreams of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is fundamental to strengthening our society and promoting unity through diversity." And the nominees are Abigail Adigan, Jaden Burney, Megan Evans, Banja Kebe, Nancy Vogo Bala, Lou Vederian. The recipient of the MLK Junior Youth Award is Nancy Vogo Bala. Congratulations.
Hi, my name is Elena Lee, and it's my honor to present the F. Michael Taft Award. This award is presented to an individual, organization, or business in recognition of exemplary efforts to attain the full inclusion of persons with disabilities in our community. The awardee will also receive a plaque with an inscription that reads, "The elimination of discrimination against individuals with disabilities and the achievement of equal access to all persons are fundamental to respect and dignity of every member of our society." And the recipient of the F. Michael Taft Award is Daryl Burns, Senior Associate at Transcend Inc. Congratulations to all the award nominees and recipients.
Thank you so much, Yesh and Elena. And congratulations to all of our award nominees and recipients. And now we welcome Dr. Joyce Ladner. Dr. Ladner is one of the nation's preeminent thought leaders. Her career has been shaped through her firsthand involvement with the civil rights movement in Mississippi and as a staff member that organized the March on Washington in 1963. She worked alongside Bayard Rustin and other civil rights leaders. In 1963, she was jailed for a week for attempting to integrate the all-white Galloway Methodist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. She's a native Mississippian and began her fight for social justice as a teenager when she helped organize an NAACP youth chapter in her hometown. She was expelled from Jackson State College in Mississippi for organizing a civil rights protest. An eminent sociologist, Dr. Ladner has studied and interpreted the intersectionality of race, gender, and class. Her book, Tomorrow's Tomorrow, The Black Woman, was the first book published in African American women's studies and is now an American classic. Her book, The Death of White Sociology, was a landmark work that challenged the value neutrality of mainstream sociology. She has published 5 additional books and numerous articles. Dr. Ladner, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to apologize for not being there virtually, so I'm only on audio because we've spent the last half hour longer than that, trying to get me on. But WebEx is not cooperating today. So I'm speaking from my landline. I want to thank you for inviting me to speak on this very important day, a day when we stop to honor the legacy of service of Dr. Martin Luther King. Too often we honor his legacy only on his birthday instead of throughout the year. Who dedicated his life to fighting for all of us to have rights guaranteed by the Constitution. For me, Dr. King was a person I met half a dozen times. He's been immortalized in a statue in Washington by streets and schools named for him, and by this federal holiday being dedicated to him, thanks in major part to his wife, his widow, Coretta Scott King. Dr. King, as I said, was someone I was in the company of for a half dozen times as he moved about the country doing the civil rights work. I'm not speaking in a boastful manner at all, because many who were in the civil rights movement had the same opportunities to meet this man, who has grown larger in death than he was during his lifetime. To speak of having been in his company is to describe the trajectory of the last years of his life. From 1962, when he spoke at the Wednesday Chapel service at Tougaloo College in Mississippi, where I was a student, that day a photographer for Jet magazine took a photo of Dr. King that was surrounded by a group of students. I was among that group. I have the photo and the autograph he gave me that day. Dr. King was an emerging leader at the time, albeit perhaps the most popular civil rights leader. In the summer of '63, as I was a field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, I was sent by SNCC to be on the staff of the March on Washington in New York City. I was 19 years old, and my job was to raise money, to do fundraising, to charter buses, so that Black people in the Deep South could come to the march. I met Dr. King twice when he and the leaders of the other civil rights organizations came to our building for those meetings. Dr. King usually popped his head into the office of the staff to say hello and to thank us for our work. He was a very humble man. Byatt Rustin was the director of the march, and Philip Randolph was the chairman of the march. We had a staff of not more than 12, 14 people, and we organized the march in about 6 weeks. Without the modern technologies like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and so on that we have today. Of course, I saw Dr. King at the march. I had a staff pass, so I was allowed free range to move about wherever I wanted to. I spent part of that day on the podium, looking out at the crowd of 250,000 people. In fact, I was on the stage when he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Get my pages right here. On that day, the speech was a great summation, not only of the work that had been done in the South, but it was even more important for the work that had yet to be done. The obstacles not yet removed and the bridges not yet crossed. You see, at that time, the civil rights movement was thought of as being confined to the South as a Southern civil rights movement. But on that day, the March on Washington, when people came from all over the country and from other countries outside the U.S., it became a national movement. But as he spoke, the great gospel singer Mahalia Jackson said to him, "Doc, tell them about the dream. Tell them about the dream." At that point, Dr. King spoke his words about his dream for his children and the children of the nation. You see, Mahalia Jackson had heard Dr. King speak about his dream. He had given that same speech, or that part of his speech, in Detroit, for example, at the NAACP annual dinner. It was Mahalia to whom he turned when he was especially down and depressed. He called her on the phone and asked her to sing his favorite song, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand," to him. But after the march, short 3 weeks later, I saw Dr. King in Birmingham, where he and other civil rights leaders had come to the funeral of the 4 little girls who were blown up by the Ku Klux Klan in the 16th Street Baptist Church. I watched him and the other civil rights leaders wade through the crowd to enter the church for the funeral. On that day, I could hear him because they had microphones outside. Dr. King rose to give the eulogy for the girls. He said, "Today, as I stand over the remains of these beautiful, darling girls, I paraphrase the words of Shakespeare. Good night, sweet princesses. Good night, those who symbolize a new day. And may the flight of angels take thee to thy eternal rest. God bless you." Dr. King and the civil rights movement had evolved over time, but Birmingham became a place that was the most dangerous in the United States, where hundreds of children were arrested and sent to jail. But as time passed, Dr. King expanded his focus from the South to the North when he led a housing march, a fair housing march in Illinois. He was almost killed that day by white men who looked like those who broke into the Capitol last week. He also expanded his concerns from the civil rights movement to include his opposition to the Vietnam War. And his last major campaign was to be here in Washington, the Poor People's Campaign, where they actually put tents on the mall and brought poor people in to symbolize poverty. But with each twist and turn, the civil rights movement was getting less and less support. The violent backlash against the movement was deafening. So when I look at where we are today with race relations and diversity, it reminds me of some of the problems that Dr. King and the civil rights movement faced. Over the past 4 years under the Trump administration, we've seen the rise in fascism and racism. Starting with the day Trump announced his candidacy for president, he talked about how the people of color south of the border, Mexicans specifically, when he called them rapists and murderers. That was followed by the racist protests in Charlottesville, and when Trump declared the white racist participants as good people on both sides. One journalist wrote, "People have talked about Trump breaking norms, especially when it comes to talking about race, and going so far as to say that he is the most racist president in modern history." There are plenty of things that we can point to augment that argument. For example, he embraced birtherism with President Obama. He referred to African nations as shithole countries. He told the 4 congresswomen of color of the squad to go back to where they came from. He called Mexican immigrants rapists and he refused to denounce white supremacy over and over. Trump banned Muslims and he declared war on Central American refugees, as I said. It will be a long time before we forget how his administration created a policy that separated children, even babies, from their parents and put them in cages. Over 500 children remain separated from their parents, many of whom were forcibly returned to their own countries. President Biden has said that he will make the reunification of these families a top priority. Excuse me. President Trump tore the country apart through his lies that the election was rigged and stolen from him before a single vote had been cast. But Dr. King and other civil rights activists, gaining the right to vote was the foundation of the civil rights movement. I knew 2 black men very well, Medgar Evers and Vernon Dahmer in Mississippi, who were murdered because they tried to get black people registered to vote. The voter suppression advocated by Trump and others reminded me of those dark days of political assassination. And it's interesting that today there's a great concern that President-elect Biden not be the victim of a political assassination. That's why there are 25,000 people on the mall. When Trump targeted Detroit, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, all cities with majority black populations, it reminded me that he felt we do not have the right to vote because of the color of our skin. You see, I tried to pass the literacy test to register to vote in Mississippi 3 times, and I was in college. But each time the voting registrar failed me. I never got a passing grade, along with other black people who tried to register. There was one question on the voter application, and on the 3rd try, I decided I was going to answer it the way not be political, but answer the way I felt. That question was, what are the duties of a good citizen? Since I knew that he was going to fail me again, I wrote that the duties of a good citizen are to obey just laws and to disobey unjust laws. Today, and I was a senior in college when I failed the last time, and this man, the voting registrar, probably only got through high school. But today I am hopeful that with the Biden presidency, we can begin to wade through the fog and the deceit and the lies and the hatred, the violence, mayhem, and insurrection of the nightmare we have just lived through over the past 4 years. That will require each of us to pick up the gauntlet and do our part to restore health to a nation reeling from the death of 400,000 people. Some of the civil rights issues today are increased poverty, climate change, police reform, and the police murders of black boys and men, the staggering unemployment rate, and poor education are some of the civil rights issues of today. The question is, what will each of us do about it? How can we build more alliances with Americans of all stripes? Allyships are critical at this point. To paraphrase, as I close, the Algerian psychiatrist Frantz Fanon said that each generation must find its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. That is our challenge for today. That is our challenge. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you, Dr. Ladner, for your words of wisdom and giving us a glimpse into what it was like to be in the midst of the civil rights movement. Dr. Ladner is staying with us for the next portion of our program, our panel discussion. And for those of you joining us, you will have an opportunity to participate by asking questions. You can do so by typing your questions. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx window, you'll see 3 icons. Clicking on the ellipsis icon, you'll see an option to submit a question via the Q&A. And right next to the ellipsis icon is the chat icon, where you may also submit your questions. And now let us introduce the rest of our panel for this afternoon. Along with Dr. Joyce Ladner, we have Rockville Human Rights Commissioner Andrew Lynn. We also have Anita Powell with the Rockville Historic District Commission and President of the Lincoln Park Historical Foundation. We have Kathy Roberts from Coming to the Table, an organization that promotes community healing through the discussion of history of racial justice. Lauren Payne we also have with us, who is a student activist and a senior who attends Richard Montgomery High School, and she's the president of Richard Montgomery High School Minority Scholars Program Branch. Thanks everyone for being here with us for this panel discussion. We can go ahead and get into it. And first, I will pose a question to all of our panelists. Social justice includes addressing a wide range of issues. Is there one that speaks specifically to you, and why? And why don't we start with you, Dr. Ladner?
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. Social justice includes a wide range of issues, and you spoke to many of these in your keynote address. Can you talk about, is there one that speaks specifically to you, and why?
Poverty and health. Because we're currently living in this nightmarish era when, as I stated, roughly 400,000 people have already died, and it's estimated that in the next month, well, very soon, that number will go up to 500,000. The people who have been most affected by this are low-income service workers and others who do not have the means to shelter themselves or to do social distancing or to stay home and not go out because they have to work. They're the ones who deliver the services to the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's one issue, and I forgot what I said. The other one was poverty.
Mm-hmm.
The tremendous poverty that's been exacerbated by the Trump administration and with the cutoff of services and so on, and by the pandemic that has led people to lose jobs, to lose their housing, their homes. Those are 2 critical issues that keep me awake at night.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Ladner. And how about we come to you, Ms. Anita Powell? Which social justice issue speaks specifically to you?
Good afternoon. What speaks to me at this moment in time is education. Mr. William B. Gibbs, first president of NAACP chapter of Montgomery County, lost his job as principal of Rockville Colored School because he fought for the rights of Black teachers to receive the same rate of pay as their white counterparts. Mr. Thurgood Marshall fought and won the case versus Gibbs. The case was settled outside of court. Therefore, you will not see the outcome or even the involvement of Mr. Thurgood Marshall, our first Black Supreme Court Justice. Stands prior to Brown versus Board of Education of 1954 case in Rockville. However, the history of this case is part of the Rockville African American Walking Tour in Rockville. This, I believe, is still an ongoing conversation, as one would say, hidden in plain sight. However, it is not hidden inside of Rockville because today, Mr. William B. Gibbs has a street named for him, as well as a statue. In an elementary school in Germantown called the William B. Gibbs Elementary School. To me, there are approximately 15 schools named after Blacks, and more recently, Odessa Shannon Elementary School several months ago. But progress for Blacks is moving in different directions. Some of the directions need to be channeled in our education today, including virtual learning and access to resources and to the internet. This is a real concern for me and the future of our children. This is a different story, I know, that has to be fixed so that our children can receive an education they deserve and to be able to choose whatever field they decide in their courageous pursuit of victory. And education should not be a factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. And we'll come to you, Ms. Kathy Roberts, your thoughts on what social justice issues speak to you in particular.
Hello, everybody. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm a volunteer with Coming to the Table, Montgomery County. And the tagline of Coming to the Table is taking America beyond the legacy of enslavement. So given my involvement in Coming to the Table, racial equity broad is the social justice issue that is most important to me. My own 17th century Maryland and Virginia ancestors played a role in creating the racial caste system that we're all living in today. And I myself have experienced significant losses around not having close friends who are Black for a large part of my life. So I really have a heartfelt responsibility to work towards taking apart the racially oppressive systems that keep us separate and rebuilding society in a way that brings us together and liberates us. And I also believe that as we create racial equity, other forms of oppression that marginalize people like class, sexuality, age, ability, weight, and all of those intersectional identities will diminish and will have be all freer to access more of our own humanity. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And how about you, Lauren? Can you talk with us and share with us what social justice issues speak to you in particular?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of the panel today. Specifically, issues that mostly I think affect me as a student and things that I've been working on in this county has been policing and just overall educational equity. Here in Montgomery County, we have a very big de facto segregation problem, and that's super apparent. And this affects Black and Brown students, especially in the DCC area. And integrating these schools and making sure that resources are accessible to all students overall is an extremely important issue to me. I'm blessed that I go to Richmond Montgomery. That's an extremely diverse school and that I have access to lots of different resources. But when you look at schools down county like Northwood, like Kennedy and Wheaton that have high immigrant populations, Black students, and you can see where they're lacking and how there's a clear disparity within the resource that they have access to, which shouldn't be the case in a majority minority county. And then specifically with policing, which has been a extremely big topic this past year, but that especially affects me just because I have lots of brothers and my dad, and I've seen how they are treated by the police, and I've seen how all of these different experiences have affected them, and how it is an extremely big problem here in Montgomery County. But because we live under this gaze of like false progressiveness, we think it's not an issue here when it's actually a very, very big problem. So those are the two issues that I are my niche and that I want to focus on here in Montgomery County specifically.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And we'll come to you, Mr. Andrew Lynn. Please share with us your thoughts. What social justice issue speaks to you?
My name is Andrew Lynn. I'm a member of the Human Rights Commission. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. The issue I'm always intrigued with, and it's more of a umbrella issue, is what members, what people from outside the Black community can do for Black people. I think the killing of George Floyd had an awakening across the whole nation, and we see a lot of expressions of interest in trying to help the Black community. I think what's more difficult is people translating that interest into actual action and actual results. And I think it's a struggle, I think, for society to get a handle on that. And many times, you need to grab the energy and holster it into actual results. And we hope that energy can continue into actual decisions and policy changes that will have positive impact on the Black community. So that's one thing I hope we can discuss more today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Lin. And I think your response dovetails quite nicely into the next question that I would like to pose to our panel. So we know that peaceful protest by Black activists has long been a critical way to advance the fight for social justice and racial equity. And with the recent awakening of this nation following the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black and brown people by the police, and the spread of awareness through social media, what role do you think that white and non-Black persons of color who wish to be allies play in the fight for social justice? And I'll pose this question first, coming to you, Ms. Kathy Roberts.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I give a lot of thought to this question, and I really see white people, I'll mostly address white people around this, but I see us having two roles. And the first is not merely to ally with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but actually to cede power to Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I'm using the word cede, C-E-D-E, meaning to give power to. And give up power too. And so I'm saying that that's the first rule for white people. And I imagine that white people listening might feel threatened by what I'm saying or actually feel a lot of resistance. And I would expect that. But I suggest we dig a little deeper and look at how our country is after 244 years of white people largely having power. And there are really wonderful and strong and positive things about our country, and some things that aren't so great about it. And I like to imagine what it might look like and how we might live in a more equitable society if, in fact, we ceded power to those whose backgrounds and perspectives have been marginalized. And I imagine that we would have a lot more humane people and culture. So that's the first thing. The second role, I think, for white people in being allies is to begin to see when racial harms and injustices are happening. There's a way we sometimes don't see them or we let them slide by, but to actually see them and begin to speak out and stand up when we do see them. I was in a group just this past week where it kind of went by and I sort of saw it and I didn't see it at the same time. So it really, it requires a lot of vigilance. So learn to see racial insults, racial invalidations and aggressions, and be willing to confront lovingly, kindly those who commit them. And it sounds easy, but it can be a real challenge because of what I'm saying about really seeing what's happening. So confronting racial harms, ceding, giving up power to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, I think are two major ways that white people in particular, can be allies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And I'm going to come to you, Lauren, next, because your generation is becoming so very increasingly vocal on issues of social justice. And so I want to come to you and ask you this question and get your response as well about the role that you think are white and non-Black persons of color who wish to be allies. What role do you believe they should be playing in the fight for social justice?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really like what you said, Kathy, and I think that's super important, and also checking your privilege. I think a lot of white people in particular don't understand like what white privilege is and what it means to walk as a white person in this country. And the sooner you're able to realize that and check your privilege, the better ally you will be. I can understand how it can be seen as an attack on you when you're being told from other people that you do have privilege and that you're in a position of power, when maybe in your own life you don't feel that, but it's still there. Whether people like to admit it or not, I think in order to be a better ally and just a better human being in general, you have to understand that you do have privilege and that you do have power, and you kind of co-opting situations or speaking over the truly marginalized groups such as Black and brown communities only hurts us in these different communities. You're like giving up your power, checking your privilege, and realizing that, you know, you have bias and that racism is the norm is the best way that you can be a better ally. I think especially although my age group has been very active, you know, so many people want to get involved in different ways, but that can, more times than not, it's kind of seen as co-opting and kind of speaking for different communities. And being aware of that and checking that is going to help you in the long run when you're trying to advocate for these different groups.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much. And how about you, Ms. Powell, Ms. Anita Powell, your thoughts on the role of our white and non-Black persons of color who wish to be allies?
Ms. Powell?
Ms. Powell, are you with us still? Oh, there we are. Okay.
Sorry. I believe that to be an ally, Blacks and whites need to, to work together to understand each other's culture. And I think that's the first thing we have to do. We can march together and not really understand why we are marching. We are marching because you're my friend. And in doing so, I believe that there needs to be some planning amongst us all, not just Black people and white people, but we need to work together to come up with a common goal in order to support whatever it is that we are trying to pursue. I think that you have to understand what the question is, what the problem is, what the challenge is, before you can even begin to have that conversation. So that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. And Dr. Ladner, do you have anything to add?
Yes, my personal experience during the height of civil rights movement, we're speaking about Dr. King, during his era, we had a lot of white involved in the civil rights movement. As a student, a lot of our workers were white, many of whom were Jewish. And they remain my friends, and they've remained very active today. Where the problem was when we began to talk about Black power, many whites left the movement because they felt that it meant white exclusion, and that was not the case at all. What we were talking about was building up institutions within the Black community and not being so reliant on just simply integrating, but on how do you strengthen your schools and so forth. But I think that allyship today, there's a lot to build on. I mean, if you look at the George Floyd demonstrations, many whites were involved in those protests, with Black Lives Matter protests. So there's some fertile ground on which to build. But I think white people have to decide that we have a right to seek justice we have the right to seek justice and we have a right to define what that means without them feeling intimidated or so forth. And that has been the difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
I think allyships are especially or easier to build, with young people who have not yet been baptized in a lot of hatred and so on and fear. But George Floyd was a largely uneducated Black man who lived a normal life, who was trying to better his life, and all around the world, what drew people together was to visually see a Black man being murdered before their very eyes. And it was no longer possible for them to hide behind this or that and say that I'm not sure it doesn't happen to everybody. I mean, or it doesn't happen that often. So we need to look into that more and see who are those people who joined protests, and what can their role be, and seek them out, and tell them that this is their problem too. They have to feel their stakeholders as well. And that was very definitely shown when all these people went into the Capitol and did everything except burn it down. And I have one more thing to say about that, and that is that all of us knew that the day would come when the increasing numbers of amount of legislation that allowed people to open carry weapons and so on, we knew the day would come when those weapons would be used in large numbers and turned on the society that they purport to love. So we need to think about that a lot. I mean, someone said on the news this morning that you can't tell me that had the Capitol Police known that a large number of black people might come into the Capitol, they would have been ready. But there's this, you can see how difficult it is to develop allies when you see that just the very people have images of who to fear and who not to fear. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll end there.
Thank you, Dr. Ledner. And I think what I'm hearing from the panel is this this idea that allyship is challenging when we believe that our interests are diametrically opposed to one another's, and when we are not willing to examine and check privilege, when we are setting our agendas and defining our goals. And I wonder, how about you, Ms. Roberts? Can you start us with an explanation of white privilege, delve into that some more, and how the understanding of privilege and the need for centering Black and Brown voices is integral to the fight against social injustice?
Privilege is such a huge topic, and it's also something quite subtle because it's built into systems so that we actually don't even always see it. But white privilege has to do with unearned advantages that those of us who are white have because of the color of our skin. And examples of this that come to mind pretty quickly are if I go to the bank and want to finance my house or car, my loan rates are likely to be higher than a Black or brown person seeking the same loan, even if pretty much everything else about us is equal. And similarly, the Washington Post reported sometime in the last few months about the different drugs that are given to Black COVID patients and white COVID patients, and the cost of those drugs and the outcomes for those drugs. So these are things that are systemic and built in. And we really have to open our eyes to see that white privilege exists, because 62% of the people in a Washington Post poll 4 years ago, 62% of white people who were polled denied that there is more bias towards Black and brown people than towards white people. So we're working with a big, I don't know what to call it, blind spot or something. Now, I don't even remember your question. That's kind of the background, but I can't remember what your question was.
So the part two of that question was, how is an understanding of this integral to the fight against social injustice?
It's absolutely integral, because if it's not understood and if we can't begin to see it, then we don't think it's there, and we don't think there has to be a fight for racial justice, because there are a lot of people who think they lost a job to someone, a person of color, and so they think there's bias against them, when there was really another reason. They had the privilege of having that job and working up to making, 6 or 7 figures or whatever. I keep getting lost in what the question is, which is interesting to me. I think it's because of the complexity of the question, and how we as white people have inner work to do to be able to see privilege, to be able to share power or even cede power, as I said earlier, and find ways to really undercut a system that's benefited us, but set up in a way that we don't even see the benefits. I have no idea if I'm making sense. I hope I am.
You are, Ms. Roberts. I think if I can just sum a little bit what you're saying, I think I'm hearing if we can't see it, then we can't name it. And if we can't name it, we can't do something about it.
That's it. Thank you for saying it with such clarity.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And I'll come to you, Andrew Lynn. Mr. Lynn, again, because the concept of allyship and the commitment to allyship is so important to you as a social justice issue, can you speak to how privilege, an understanding of privilege, and the need to center Black and Brown voices, how that's integral to the fight against social injustice to you?
Yeah, I'll just add on to it a little bit, I guess. I think that it does require a very persistent and patient dialogue to talk about concepts like white privilege. The term white privilege, unfortunately, has been distorted by certain elements. And as was mentioned before, some people feel threatened about it. Many people think it means something it doesn't. They think it means, oh, they're saying you have white privilege. They're saying your life is easy. They're saying that your life is easier because you're white. And obviously it's not that simple. It's much more nuanced than that. And I think part of what people who want to be allies can do is engage in that dialogue with other people and try to make them understand that it's much more complex than that. It's not this bumper sticker Twitter version of what they may have seen in some provocative media out there. And it's not an easy conversation to have, but engage in it, be patient, try to change minds. And it's just difficult dialogue. And nowadays, unfortunately, in the national political atmosphere, it's very difficult to have these kind of conversations with a meaningful result. But I think that's our only hope.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Absolutely. And I think that speaks to what Ms. Powell and what Dr. Ladner were also saying about that we need to be in dialogue with one another. We need to be able to and willing to have these uncomfortable conversations with one another so we can really get to the heart of issues and making sure that we're utilizing a shared understanding of terms and of history when we engage with one another. Thank you. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit to our next question because I think as it's leading into some of the questions that we also have from our audience members. So let's get into the history of the movement. Before we can understand where we want to go, we have to learn about where we have been and how we got to this point. And so I want to start with you, Ms. Powell. As a Rockville Historic District Commissioner, can you briefly speak to Rockville's Black history?
Thank you for the question. Josiah Henson, as a child slave brought from Charles County, was brought and sold on an auction block in downtown Rockville to Adam Robbs, a prominent Rockville citizen and slave owner. A historical marker placed on West Jefferson Street will give you the history. Josiah Henson was traded for horseshoes. And I emphasize that because he was a child slave, but in Mr. Adams' mind, he was not worth anything other than horseshoes. And he was traded from Adam Robbs to Isaac Raleigh, slave owner and blacksmith. In honor of Reverend Josiah Henson, who was brought from Charles County, sold and separated from his mother on the auction block in Rockville, became the overseer of all slaves, earned the trust of the slave master for about 30 years, and eventually moved by way of the Underground Railroad to Dawn, Canada, to continue his journey with his ministry as a reverend. So in courageous pursuit of victory, I believe historically, Reverend Josiah Henson is a product of moving forward in spite of the odds placed before him. And because of his history, today, the site of the Raleigh Plantation is called Josiah Henson Museum and Park, located on Old Georgetown Road, and will be open for visitors in the near future. To learn more about the history of where we have come from, I encourage you to sign on to the City of Rockville website and type in Rockville's African American Heritage Walking Tour. The historical markers in downtown Rockville were initiated when I served as the chair of Rockville Historic District Commission. In addition to the markers, the city did produce a brochure to go along with the marker. I would be remiss if I did not share with you that in 2006, I was asked by the County Executive Douglas M. Duncans to accept the deed on the Raleigh Plantation and its current owners on behalf of the citizens of Montgomery County, and it was an honor to do so. So I think that when we move forward, if we know our history, really know our history, that will help us to move forward to where we need to go. But if you don't know your history, you don't know what happened before you, then it's very difficult to just jump into your future without any type of footprints whatsoever to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yes, there's so much history for us to know about in Rockville, in Montgomery County, and certainly in our nation at large, that we really need to be aware of to help guide our steps for the future. I would like to come to you, Dr. Ladner, and pose to you that, throughout the years, civil and social activism has changed. And can you talk about the differences that you see between activism in the 60s and the 70s, for example, and activism today?
It's changed a lot. I often use two examples. One is how we organized, for example, the March on Washington. I'm sure a lot of the young people have never heard of mimeograph machines. Do any of the older people on this panel remember the time that we used mimeograph machines to make copies of? This was long before we Xeroxed. Anyway, the lack of technology meant that we organized door to door. We canvassed. I'll tell you a story about how Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer became involved in the movement. My sister and about 4 or 5 other young people got a group of people in Sunflower County, Ms. Hamer's town, to go to the courthouse to attempt to register to vote. And of course they were unsuccessful, but they got a busload of Black people. This is the summer of '62. And when Mrs. Hamer got back to the cotton plantation that she lived on, she didn't own any property. The owner of the plantation told her that she had to go back to the courthouse the next day and remove her name as an attempted registrant. And she told him, "I'm not doing any such thing because I attempted to register for myself and not for you." So that very night, he had some of his workers on the plantation remove her furniture from her house and set it on alongside the road. And that was, and these young civil rights workers went and found a temporary place for her to live. They got a truck and moved her furniture. That's the origin of activism in a way. They didn't have Twitter to announce a demonstration to these people to meet us at the courthouse. We are going to try to get registered to vote. They wouldn't have known Mrs. Hamer if they hadn't knocked on the doors, or if her relatives or friends from her church had told her that there are these young people who are trying to get us to register to vote, and you want to go tomorrow. We had to rely on face-to-face interaction with people. And today you can post a note, post on Twitter that we're expecting all of you. We're trying to get 250 people, for example. Meet us on the mall tomorrow at 12 o'clock. And, hundreds of people will show up. The question is, what did you do with the people after they showed up? Did you get their names and addresses or phone numbers? And nowadays, the email address to stay in touch with them. All of that, it's a lot more impersonal today than it was then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Ladner. I think many, I would agree with you in terms of the difference in terms of the lack of modern technology in being able to spread the word about things, and things being so much more face-to-face in planning and execution. I want to come to you, Lauren. Can you share with us, what are your thoughts about the ways you see social activism as having changed or having stayed the same, or both, from the 60s and 70s to now with your generation?
No, I definitely agree with what was said. I think social media plays a humongous part in, like, I guess, modern day activism. I know I organized a protest this summer, and all of the promotion was basically done through like social media. We didn't have, like, the three of us who organized it didn't have like any kind of contact with like attendees, but through social media we were able to just mobilize so many people that were like beyond expectations. And I think that's honestly such a pro, just because you're able to mobilize so many people at such a quick moments of time. So I think a lot of it can be extremely efficient as far as mobilization period. But I think that can be also a con, just because there can be times where people's advocacy may not be as genuine as people would like it to be. A lot of people think that reposting something on Instagram or retweeting something that equals activism, and that that's truly helping a cause move forward, when reposting something in the grand scheme of things doesn't do a lot. So that can be kind of something that's tossed around. But I think the pros outweigh the cons as far as the role, like, overall just social media plays in activism, and that just how quickly you're able to mobilize people and bring people together. A lot of the things, like what happened to George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, the only reason why we're really talking about it today is because we were able to catch it on camera. And a lot of these things aren't new, they're just being filmed. And that's important, because we wouldn't know these things were really being happening. People would just be able to continue to overlook what's happening. But now that we have social media, now that we have phones, we're able to really expose things that have been here for the whole time.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'm struck by another feature of social activism in the 60s and 70s and earlier, was the longevity of social activism. And I'm curious, and it brings to mind with Dr. Ladner's comment of what happens after the march, after you've organized everybody and after you've gathered everybody into one space, whether that be in person or virtually through social media campaigns and such. I think about the Alabama bus boycotts and how many people don't realize that the boycotts lasted for 381 days. And so I'd like to hear from members about the importance of being part of the democratic process for the long haul, including voting, protesting, and different other acts of advocacy, testifying before Congress. Ms. Powell, can you share your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I guess when you talk about voting, we did provide a lot of training on the importance of voting. And it was like a weekly event with different topics. Voting is so important. And I think that sometimes, because it becomes a part of our everyday, we vote, during election time, we just sort of do that. But we need to know and understand who we are putting in office. Right. We need to understand how we can hold those individuals accountable. We need to know their history. We need to know their bio. It's good that I know Jody, but who is Jody? He's a nice person. He speaks well. He comes to the event. He does a lot of things, but how is he going to represent me in the Hall of Congress or in Annapolis or in the city of Rockville or even in Montgomery County, part of the Montgomery County Council? How will I be represented in terms of who I select or elect and put into office. So I think that's very important. And I think that's why we, for the last, since February, had put on a weekly webinars to get people to that point. Because a lot of times someone may call and ask you a question. They may say, who do you think we need to vote for? Who are you voting for? And when I respond to that question, I give them a history lesson because I'm a historian, right? Or researcher. So I want you to know, just because I'm voting for someone, you have to vote for a person because of who you are and what you want to take back. If you look into what happened with the mob on January 6th, I was so proud of the young congresspersons who grabbed the ballot box and they protected it so that it would not get destroyed. Can you just imagine if the mob was able to get hold of those of the ballot boxes? What would have happened? Where we would have gone?
Right.
Okay, that is just so unbelievable. And then when I look at the mob again, and I know it's a little bit different, okay? But when I look at it and I see on CNN where individuals just sort of just went into government and did what they wanted to do. And the Capitol Police just stood there. Don't do that. That's someplace you shouldn't be. They went through government documents. Don't do that. But if it had been Black Lives Matters, they would have been ready for us.
Yes.
And we need to be real about that. And yes, this is an uncomfortable conversation, but if we don't get uncomfortable to get comfortable, we will continue to not have those conversations. So we are treated differently, even in the spider thing, and yes, on the backs of George Floyd. But look at what happened. I mean, they were just so complacent. They were just so comfortable with what they were doing. And it was okay. We would never have been able to get as far as they did. And then to film myself and you go back to Lauren, yes, social media, they really got them this time because they were proud of what they were doing. But guess what? They're also being challenged and they're being found and they will be charged. So thank you, social media, for that. And I just, and it just overwhelms me with how we are still going down that journey. We are still pushing forward that it's okay. Well, it's not okay. I mean, if we had another country looking at us, how do you think they see us? We can't even handle a domestic terrorism or whatever you want to call it. We've got to do better than that. And that's why we are where we are today with the National Guards, with Mayor Bowser. It's just so much going on. And you have to pay attention. That's number one. If you want to do a march, pay attention to why you're marching. Pay attention to why you're protesting. Just don't go because I asked you to go. Go with a purpose in mind, knowing that there's an end to why you march. I orchestrated a march in 2015 when I was the president of NAACP, and it was on the backs of Michael Brown. We absolutely had our politicians to walk with us. And we had a conversation in the county executive auditorium or the EOB building, executive office building. We had that conversation. We didn't just march and say, come on and walk along with me and tell me your story. I put you in the office, so I expect something. No, I expect more than that. And they were there and they were held accountable. And we had that conversation amongst the politicians, the community members, and others who were part of the conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Yes.
Okay. It occurs to me that allyship, or that this is fertile ground now for developing allyship, because all Americans should have a stake in the extent to which the country has devolved to a point where white people have taken over the seat of government. That they're fellow whites, that they need to be involved in defining whether or not are these my relatives, are these the children of people I know. These are not Black Lives Matter people or Black Panthers, but they belong to us. So this is a time when white people need to take the leadership in communities in helping to stamp out the scourge and you know the problems that have corroded the society. And by the way, one final point I'll make is that on the news today there was it was stated that the laptop that was stolen from Speaker Pelosi's office, well, a woman had it and she tried to sell it to the Russian government. Can you believe it?
Wow. Wow.
It's not a Black problem. And these are the same people who say that we are patriots. No way.
Thank you, Dr. Ladner and Ms. Powell. I think I hear what I'm hearing, from both of you is this idea that, knowing and researching our legislative candidates, knowing why you're marching, why you're protesting, why you're voting, and this strategic use of both old and new aspects of social activism and stronger allyship is really integral to lasting civic engagement so that we see the results that we would really like to see for our society. And so I want to ask you, and you can start us off, Dr. Ladner, your thoughts about, what advice can you give to people who want to be involved in this journey towards racial equity and the fight against social injustice? What lessons have you learned from your experience as an activist in the 50s and 60s that you would offer to younger activists today?
Well, one thing I can say is that it doesn't take thousands of people to solve a problem. Social change begins with one idea or one person, or it can start there. And that you shouldn't feel that you've got to have, as I said, a host of people. And also some people may not think that they're leaders. Well, you are a leader. I should say you're influential with your peers. You don't have to be a fully grown and developed person who can command, the thousands of people to follow you. It starts with one person in their group, to change. And taking one step, is the first step of solving these problems.
Thank you, Dr. Ladner. And I want to come to you also. Ms. Roberts, can you share, as someone, you've expressed how committed you are and how important allyship is in this movement towards social justice and racial equity. Can you talk about the lessons that you've learned through your civil activism?
Sure. I think of activism in two ways, especially for white people. And one is inner activism, of working through and interrogating yourself and rooting out whatever biases remain, and we'll probably have biases our whole lives because the system is so deep in our bones. But that's one of the ways. Sometimes I work with a lot of people who will say, I want to do something, and it's almost a hand-wringing thing. And if we just go out and do things without also paying close attention to what we don't know about ourselves and our biases, sometimes the things we do end up being paternalistic and more harmful than otherwise. So there's the inner activism of rooting out your own biases. And then there's the outer work and coming to the table. One of our tenets is taking direct action. And that can be in whatever way is within our heart. I believe things are best when they're heart-centered and flowing out of our hearts. And that can be finding one particular area of racial or social justice that you really want to move forward in. For mine, it's building bridges and building relationships among the community that we develop in coming to the table. And that's really the most important thing. I'm not sure I'm out there trying to change anybody's mind who is quite different than me, but I do want us to come together in some kind of way where we can respect one another and share stories. And here I'm talking about within the whiteness, like communicating and sharing stories of, say, people who were really violent on the mall, and finding out, what led you to that point? What How did you get to the point where you went down there and did that? And just listening and holding accountable, of course, but really relationship building, which I think other people have mentioned in answer to other questions, is core. But so is that inner work, like the inner work for us.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Thank you. And I think the last question I'm going to pose to each of the panelists, it's a double question, as it were. So I want to ask you specifically, what inspires you and gives you hope to continue your mission of activism? And what organization or specific move would you recommend for a person who wants to be involved and make an impact on social issues? And I'm actually going to start with you first, Lauren. What inspires you? And what would you recommend as an organization that someone can get involved with to be part?
As far as what inspires me, I think, so I came to I didn't go to RM my freshman year. I transferred from a predominantly very white school. And so I think going to RM and finally connecting with other like young women of color, specifically young Black girls, I think that's a really source of inspiration for me, seeing connecting with them on their experiences and then collaborating with them on different things that we've done. That's, I think, those are people who I think really inspire me to continue doing what I'm doing. And I think that's like the most organic source of inspiration is the people around you. And specifically for younger people who want to get involved, I recommend, as far as organizations like Montgomery County Students for Change, that's a group that really kind of introduced me to advocacy in this county. And those are students who I think really want to do change on such an equitable level. And so that's a great entryway point. And also Young People for Progress, which is an organization that I'm a part of on leadership, which is getting younger people involved in politics, government, and just civic engagement in general, that focuses on a wide range of issues. And so those are two organizations that I think I would recommend.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And I'll come to you next. Mr. Lin, what inspires you? And what organizations would you recommend that someone get involved with?
It sounds, a little bit trite and ordinary, but of course, I do have some faith in the younger people in the country. They're very passionate. I think they're very intelligent and they're very spirited. So I think that when they come into power, we should see some great things happen, hopefully. And then right now, we're seeing the struggle between older generations, younger generations. A lot of what's happening in the country is this transition of power. I do have some hope on that front. I do have some, my big worry is that changeover in power and how our political institutions can handle that. And it's pretty messy right now, but we'll see how it plays out. As for organizations, I would recommend, well, I'm going to go the obvious route and note that you can become involved with the Human Rights Commission. We actually have several vacancies right now. And we also have a student ambassador program each year where high school students can apply to play a part in a role in our commission and volunteer with us. You saw several of our ambassadors speak today. So check out our website and become involved with the commission. You can apply to join the commission and we'd love to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lin. And Ms. Roberts, what inspires you to continue your mission of activism, and what organization do you want to plug?
Yeah, of course. Well, I would echo what Lauren said about the people around me continue to inspire me. The relationships I've developed with African Americans and the work that I do is beautiful and heartening, and watching white people grapple with their privilege and grow is also heartening. Those two things inspire me. And of course, the organization that I have to plug is Coming to the Table, a national organization with over 40 local chapters, 2 of which are in Rockville, one in Montgomery County and one at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Rockville. And what we do is work towards uncovering history, making connections, working towards healing, and taking direct action. So we kind of put it all together, and it was developed. I'll just say one more quick thing, and that is it was formed by descendants of enslaved and descendants of enslavers coming together to work together to heal the wounds of and harms of racism in this country. So Yeah, comingtoTheTable.org.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And you, Ms. Powell, quickly, if you can share with us what inspires you to keep going and what organizations would you recommend for those who want to be part of social justice?
What inspires me is a guy by the name of Dr. James T. Moon. And one thing he said was that you must interview the old people first, or your elders first, because once they die, so will their history. And so my strength has really been to interview the older people, to really understand who they are and what they've been through. And then, of course, I'm going to plug the Lincoln Park Historical Foundation because of the training, education, research that we are involved in. But I also wanted to say that in addition to that is that if we go back to the mission of the city of Rockville and their efforts to create ways in which we can participate in ongoing dialogue like today, I would recommend you to get involved with the student government and organization, boards and commissions, and nonprofit organization of which you believe you can take with you on this journey, such as the Human Rights Commission and others. More importantly, attend and join community groups and virtual webinars focusing on racial equity and inclusion. Understand another person's culture. Communicate with those who don't look like you. Learn from those who look like you, who have traveled this journey before and have left us with footprints to follow, which will allow us to leave footprints for others to follow. Look into your life journey thus far and figure out where you want to be and where you can make a difference in your fight for racial equity against social justice. Join the movement against hate and instill love. And I give you this quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And finally, I would recommend that you read up on your history in Rockville and Montgomery County to learn of the fights, the issues, and challenges we face and are still facing on racial equity and equality. You can start by taking a walking tour on virtually touring the Rockville African American Walking Tour in Rockville, which covers both Rockville and Montgomery County, from slavery, segregation, integration, to unfair social justice, which still exists since the 50s and the 60s. Again, talk with your elders in your home, in the community, and continue to attend programs like this to be able to share information with you in real time and space. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. And finally, coming to you, Dr. Ladner, what inspires you to continue with your mission of activism, and what organizations might you recommend for those who want to get involved?
I have always been inspired by the optimism of young people. I was a college professor for most of my career, and so I was always in touch with young people who will take chances. They will call out the problems, and they will organize to do something about it. I would recommend the movement for Black Lives, which is an umbrella organization, and you can go to the website movementforblacklives.com, and you'll find and there are different activities, different chapters across the country. It's an outgrowth of Black Lives Matter because there are a lot of other organizations in addition to Black Lives Matter, and plug into one of those locally based groups and get involved.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ladner, and thank you to all of our panel participants. And I want to just take a moment to pass it over to Mayor Bridget Donald-Newton, if you have a few closing remarks for us before we adjourn for the afternoon.
Thanks, Niambi. You have led an incredible discussion today, and my thanks to all the panelists, Anita Powell and Kathy Roberts, Andrew Lynn, I'm going to forget people, Lauren Payne. This is why you shouldn't do this off the cuff, but I do want to thank you all because I believe that Rockville is embarking on a very courageous path. We have to know our history. Anita, you are so right. We have to know our history before we can move forward. And to that end, one of the questions in the chat was about what are the schools teaching about this history, and we need to push for that. We need to have our own historical
place, a museum of African American history in Rockville in Montgomery County. I'd like to see that here in Rockville. I just think, honestly, this was a great day, a great discussion. I thank my colleagues, council members Pershela, Feinberg, and Ashton for being on. Thanks to Senator Kagan, delegate, forgetting delegate, not council member, Julie Plakovich-Carr, and any other members. I believe Montgomery County Board of Education member Shebra Evans was on as well, and I apologize if I'm forgetting anybody, but I thank you, and I do believe that together we can go forward in the courageous pursuit of victory for everyone. So let's work together. Let's make that happen. Kathy Roberts, thank you. I look forward to participating in one of the discussions on coming to the table. That's the only way we're going to make it work. Thank you all so very much. Asmara and Janet Kelly, I thank you as well.
Thank you, Mayor Newton. So that's going to do it for today's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get to every single question that was in the chat box, but we tried to get to as many as possible. Thank you so much for all of the attendees submitting your questions and participating with us today. And, you know, while today isn't the way we're used to celebrating Dr. King's legacy, the conversations that we've had are all part of keeping Dr. King's dream alive. Our courageous pursuit of victory, of racial equity, is far from over and maybe a continuing process, we know, but armed with knowledge and leadership, we can definitely make a difference. I want to thank again our panelists and our keynote speaker, Dr. Joyce Ladner, the Rockville Historic District Commissioner, Anita Powell, Kathy Roberts for coming to the table, and our Human Rights Commission Student Ambassador, Lauren Payne, and Human Rights Commissioner, Andrew Lynn for participating. The city staff would also like to thank the Rockville Human Rights Commission and our Rockville Mayor Newton and the Mayor and Council for all of their support in making this discussion possible for today. We also want to specifically thank Senator Cheryl Kagan and County Council President Sidney Katz and Board of Education member Shebra Evans for their attendance and participation with us today. Thank you so much for being with us. And you can learn more about the Rockville Human Rights Commission by heading to RockvilleMD.gov/HRC. And for the City of Rockville and the Rockville Human Rights Commission, I'm Niambi Powell. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.